The stoppable force against the very movable object. Manchester United against Arsenal probably doesn't have the same glitz and glamour as it had in previous seasons. Harry, I'll start with you. Obviously, Arsenal just beat PSV 7-1, lacking in the league. How do you see this one going?
Well, it's still a game that means a lot to both sets of supporters, I'd imagine, because the rivalry is quite deep running, particularly if you're sort of around my age group. Manchester United were the team that you wanted to beat at the start of every season. I know Tottenham fans won't appreciate me saying this, but they were a little bit irrelevant back then. So it's still a game that means a lot. But I think Arsenal have got every right to go into this feeling really, really confident after what we saw in midweek in Europe. There's been a lot of talk about how blunt they've been in attack. There's 2 games consecutively in the Premier League where they've not been able to score, and that has really kind of increased the noise around that particular issue. But they went over to the Netherlands in a high-pressured environment, high-pressured game in midweek with the same players, Mikel Merino up front, Nwaneri playing on one side, Trossard on the other, and literally dismantled the Champions League side. So there's a lot more reason to be optimistic from an Arsenal point of view. And if I'm a Man United fan, I've got to be honest, I'm fearing this because they haven't been very good. They particularly have been bad at home. And along comes a side that have just maybe clicked right at the right time, and a side that you've historically got a rivalry against. And it probably feels as a Man United fan like there's a potential humiliation on the cards.
Do you think that PSV game was a change and, like you say, like the team clicking, or do you think it was just an outlier in what over the last couple of months have been some relatively poor performances?
I never want to say scoring 7 goals away in Europe is an outlier because I feel like you're sort of taking credit away from the team and what they achieved on that particular night. I think it was always going to take time for them to get used to Mikel Merino being the centre forward. His movement's different. There's been some tweaks and some adjustments for Declan Rice, who's getting a lot closer to him. You've got Martin Odegaard, who seemed to have found his form again the other night. Ethan Nwaneri's getting better and better. Leandro Trossard contributed. What I thought was the big difference in midweek was not necessarily the personnel or anybody sort of playing at a much higher level than they had been, but more so there was a change in the mindset, in the attitude. It was kind of like take the handbrake off and just go for it positionally, get into the right spaces, push both your eights on, be really aggressive in the way that you pin back the opposition, get bodies into the box, which is something Arsenal haven't done enough of this season. I know it sounds really basic, but that felt like a problem to me. So I think it was a mindset switch more than anything else.
Yeah, I was watching the Madrid derby and I was seeing the scores come through for Arsenal and I couldn't believe it. This is a PSV team that, and I understand the post-mortem after that game, after Arsenal scored 7 away from home, is, PSV aren't that great. But this is a PSV side that inflicted Liverpool's only defeat in the group phase, and they're a good side. They are going well in their Eredivisie. But Arsenal, like you said, there was a change in emphasis, a change in mindset, and change in impetus, and we saw Arsenal at their very best. And they've had a few of these performances in the Champions League. Think about the game against Sporting, where Arsenal were completely dominant against a Sporting team that were very good at the time. They've got that within them. Obviously, the attacking losses in Saka and Kai Havertz means that you've been a little bit blunt in the league, but that was a huge performance for the confidence of Arsenal. And I want to pay particular attention to Ethan Nwaneri, who is a player that you mentioned is getting better and better. And this is almost a perfect environment for him to flourish. Again, he's young, so the minutes will take its toll. And we've seen in previous games where he looks a little bit leggy towards the back end of the games. But where there isn't that pressure that someone's going to take his spot in the starting 11, he can really flourish and really growing into himself. And he's a player that I really like, and I think between now and the end of the season, we're going to see more performances like we saw in midweek against PSV.
I think the guy's an incredible finisher for starters. Yeah. That left foot of his is unbelievable. And the way he finished the chance that came his way against PSV, it wasn't just accurate, it wasn't just it was emphatic, the way he sort of rifled that into the back of the net. And the movement as well, to come from the right flank and turn up at the near post on the opposite side. It says a lot about how early he kind of reads the danger. And it speaks to what I was just saying about Arsenal taking more risks and more gambles in terms of their positioning. Him playing on the right-hand side, I don't see that necessarily as being his long-term position. I think he's more of a central player, and I think he does do his best work when he's coming inside. So I think there might be a view that maybe he's cover not just for Saka, but for Odegaard as well moving forward. But right now, playing on the right-hand side where he has a little bit less responsibility in the kind of thick of the game, at 17 years old, as he's developing both sort of in terms of maturing, but also physically. I think it's working really, really well for him.
Just to go back to that mentality point, I think we mentioned it a few times this season, talking about Arsenal's mentality and saying that maybe they're suited a little bit better to tournament football. They're a bit better suited to winning the Champions League than they were to win the Premier League. I think that probably is out of grasp now. Do you think that maybe a little bit of the problem is in Premier League games, Arteta goes in to not lose them, whereas in the Champions League, because you have to win, especially at these knockout stages, he goes to win them rather than to be a little bit more defensive? Because I do think over the last couple of seasons, particularly last year, I think Arsenal were the best team in the league. I think they were better than Man City. I think there were a couple of games where they were just a little bit too nervous, particularly like Villa at home, where your main objective was to defend and not lose that game rather than win that game. And I think a little bit, particularly at the beginning of the season, it was the same. You know, we were on the same show when we were saying Arsenal are a little bit less attacking, a little bit more boring. Do you think that is a problem that has happened in the Premier League so far this season?
I don't think Mikel Arteta goes into any game not wanting to win it first and foremost. I just think he's that type of guy. He's always fired up. He's always charged up. Do I think at times some of his recruitment has been prioritizing of a more physical sort of profile of player than a technical one? Yes. And do I think that imbalance has maybe led to it seeming like Arsenal are a bit more negative than positive at times? Yeah, for sure. But I think he goes out to win games. I really do. And what we saw the other night, which was lots of bodies getting forward, people attacking certain areas, creating overflows, overrides, creating floods in the box. That is what Arsenal were doing last season. And I don't believe between last season and this season, his philosophy changed. I think there were other reasons why it appeared that Arsenal were approaching games in a slightly different way. But philosophically, I don't think much has changed, to be honest.
Yeah, I think this is an Arsenal team that they've suffered with injuries, which they didn't really suffer with last season. They were probably one of the most healthy top teams in the Premier League.
Their front three are out.
Yeah,
basically.
the front three's out, and you're having to make do with Mikel Moreno playing as a I wouldn't say a false nine. He's playing an interesting position, occupying the top end of the pitch for Arsenal. But they're a side that can be dangerous, and against Manchester United at Old Trafford, that feels like cash money for Arsenal. This is a Man United side that have been very poor at home, shipped goals at home. I think in 6 of their last 7 games at Old Trafford, the opposition has scored 2 or more goals. And that speaks to their vulnerability when it comes to their defensive work. It speaks to their vulnerability and their lack of belief, in my opinion, in Amorim's system as of late. And I think he needs to get his own personnel in. He needs to maybe adjust what he's doing this season to the personnel that he's got. But I think Arsenal goes to Old Trafford. This looks like an Arsenal win. They won their last 4 games against Manchester United in the league. And I think Arsenal goes to this game as clear favourites.
I mean, one win in the last 5 for Man United. They needed an offside Harry Maguire goal to beat Leicester in the Cup in those 5 games. Obviously been on really poor form. I don't think any of us can say that Amorim has really improved the side. Arsenal are second. They've just scored 7 goals in the Champions League away from home. How do United win this game? What can they do to tactically set up to actually beat Arsenal?
They don't win this game. They don't win this game, I don't think. Again, it's dangerous for me to call that before a ball's been kicked. But I just look at Manchester United and the lack of confidence, the lack of belief, and the way they've had to try and manoeuvre and get through games. It's just not sustainable to me. And initially when Amorim came in, they got big results. A big result against Arsenal in the FA Cup, a big result against City at City, a huge result at Anfield, that draw, which they could have won. But in recent weeks, I've just been disappointed with what I've seen from Manchester United, the Ruben Amorim, a manager that I had a lot of faith in, but I think the system at Manchester United, the whole shadow of former managers and great players talking in the media week in, week out, it's just too much pressure for one man. I feel like this weekend we're going to see Manchester United, as we have seen over the last few weeks, struggle against big sides.
It's hard with Man United to get a read on how this is going to look maybe 6, 8, 12 months down the line, because on the one hand, I really admire Ruben Amorim for coming in and going, this is my way, and I don't care if you don't like it. This is the way I've been brought in to set up this team, and I'm going to do it. And we're going to keep doing it over and over again until we get to where we want to be, right? But by that same token, I think when you're at a club the size of Manchester United, you've got a responsibility to sort of stop the fall. And it doesn't feel like he's willing to do that he's willing to put his principles to one side. Park them, if you like. I'm not saying abandon them, but just park them temporarily to make the side competitive again. What I will say, though, is that his system has worked quite well against Arsenal twice already this season, both at the Emirates. In the league game, it took set pieces for Arsenal to undo them. And in the cup game, obviously, they got through on penalties. So it's a system that can work against Arsenal. And they've shown already that they can stifle an Arsenal side. So.
But you say that Amorim should be being a bit more pragmatic or changing his style to be more competitive, but there isn't really any point, in my opinion, for United to do that at the moment anyway. They're 15th in the league. The best they're probably going to get is 10th. They most likely won't win a cup. They could win the Europa League. We'll see what happens tonight when they play Sociedad. But we know that a large part, and we criticised Eric Ten Hag for it as well. The last 6 months, every day on this show, I was like, I don't understand what Manchester United formation is. I don't understand how they play. And that's because Ten Hag completely abandoned his philosophy and his style of play. If Amorim abandons his style of play and the players continue to let him down, and these are players who have let down Jose Mourinho, these are players who have let down Louis van Gaal, some of these players have let down very, very top managers, and they continue to do that, then Amorim again will be under the firing line for, he should have stuck to his principles. So I feel like there's no way for him to win, particularly this season when they're in such a rut at the moment. None of the players seem like they're playing for the shirt. Is it just a case of ride it out to the end of the season?
He's got to start building the confidence up, though, because whether you like it or not, and we keep talking about this group of players, he's not going to be able to overhaul that entire squad come the summer.
Yeah.
Because Manchester United financially can't do it. So he is going to have to make some of these players produce more. And you need to slowly, bit by bit, build their confidence up. And I don't think continuing to play in a way that clearly doesn't suit them is going to achieve that. If you're telling me come the summer he can go and get 5 or 6 top players and completely change the face of his starting 11, then fine. But based on what we're reading, based on what we're hearing, I don't see that being the case. So I look at people like, De Ligt, Maguire, Bruno Fernandes, Garnacho, Xerxes, Højlund. You've got to get more out of them. And so again, I'm not saying abandon it and forget about what you've come in to do, but you've got to make some adjustments, some tweaks. There's no shame in doing that. And it isn't going to take away from his end goal and where he wants them to be. It just means you might have to take a slightly different route to get it. It's like a diversion, if you like.
I mean, you look at that team, though, and you mentioned some of those players there. Like, realistically, in an ideal world, who are you keeping? On current form or on the form of the last year or so, if you're trying to compete, as Manchester United want to, for getting into the Champions League spots, winning cups, who out of those players do you genuinely want leading your dressing room next year?
I don't think it's a question of who do you want. It's a question of the market and the business that you're going to be able to do. Like Harry said, you're not going to be able to overhaul all of the squad. There's not too much sell-on value with a lot of Man United's assets. Obviously, the likes of a Lindelof and an Ericsson are going on a free anyway, get those contracts off the book. They, for some reason, triggered the extension of Harry Maguire's contract, so he's got another year left on his deal. Casemiro will have a year left come the summer. So there are players that will exit as a result of the contracts running out, but I just think he has to deal with what he's got, similar to what Arteta had to do when he first went to Arsenal. But he did adapt. Arsenal played 3 at the back in Arteta's first half season. They managed to win the trophy, and I feel like results are huge, especially when you're at a club like Manchester United. Fans are not going to accept Man United finishing 15th. That's unacceptable. We put them in the pantheon of footballing greats alongside the Bayern Munichs and the Real Madrids and the Barcelonas. Those sides will never finish in the bottom half of their league tables. Granted, the Premier League's more competitive, but I do think that Amorim just has to figure out which players he can utilise in his system, because come the summer, he's not going to be able to get rid of 8-9 players.
Right, well, let's get to some predictions then. You definitely don't think Manchester United will win the game. What are you going for?
3-1 Arsenal win.
Harry?
I'm going to go for the famous old 1-0 to the Arsenal, because all of Arsenal's 5 Premier League wins at Old Trafford in the Premier League have been 1-0s. So 1-0 to the Arsenal to continue.
I have a feeling it might be a draw. I don't really know where I'm coming from, but I just think 3 out of the last 5 games, Arsenal failed to score. I know you just put 7 past PSV away from home, but I'm feeling like a 1-1.